Hello and welcome to the week that really was. I'm your host, Sarah Ryan, for 1 week only. Anybody who's watching will have guessed or seen that my good friend and colleague John McGurk is not with us this week. He is off gallivanting for the week. But I have a very worthy replacement in John this week, in that I am joined by King of my world, Dr. Keith Redmond, my husband. How are you, Keith?
That's terribly well. That's the best you've ever introduced me to anything, anybody ever.
Yeah,
As
there you
is
go.
as is the norm on this podcast. I really feel as to say, geez, you're looking really well, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks. Should definitely make that part of the intro. Um, so for our listeners tonight, we're going to talk about the obvious one, Trump tariffs. We're going to see if Keith is suffering with the same chronic case of Trump derangement syndrome that poor John is, and whether or not they're a wake-up call for Ireland. We're going to talk about Temple Street and the Children's Hospital and operations that weren't done on children there and what's come out about that this week. We're going to talk about Hungary and their tax policies for people who want to have loads of children. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a few other things: sex work, drugs, and Enoch Burke.
That should cover it.
So, Keith, you're a long-time listener, first-time caller, although loyal listeners to this podcast will remember that you were on with us a couple of times. Would it be a year and a half ago now?
I think I was on when you pre-video. We were on an audio one.
Yeah.
We were
So it's
we were
been a
talking
while.
about sex working as well. Yeah, it seems to be
Yeah,
a running
exactly.
theme for me, doesn't it? Bit of a worry. There you go.
Yeah, I know. The comments will be brutal. Just prepare yourself. But to start off, I suppose, let's talk about Donald Trump. So, as a long-time listener, first-time caller, you will know that I have been, really shouldering a lot of the weight when it comes to Trump because, well, as far as John is concerned, Trump can do no right, and John has got as I said, a bad case of Trump derangement syndrome. This week, I noticed from his tweets that he seems to be acting as if he's pretty vindicated, and there's been a lot of messing back and forth with Trump's tariffs. They're on, they're off, they're back on, they're back off, and at the moment they've been paused for 90 days. So John is acting like king of the hoop a little bit on Twitter and acting like he was right all along. What say you?
Well, as you know, I don't suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. I'm a fan. And you and I were in the States there recently, and the all-pervasive nature of how popular he is extraordinary. We were in New York, and New York wouldn't be typically a Republican area, and yet
No.
we found people walking around with the MAGA hats, and people were freely speaking about him, and very happy to talk about him. So there's definitely a different shift from his first term. His first term, was very divisive. This time around, I think people are giving him the benefit of the doubt. Now he's testing people. Let's be honest. He's testing people with the nature of these tariffs because he's effectively seeking to change the world economic model as it affects the United States. So let's take a little step back, and then I can try and defend the guy, which is going to be tough to an Irish audience, but I'll try my best. So if you think back 50 years ago in the United States, it was very much a manufacturing country. So you had the Midwest was replete with factories, whether it was Detroit making cars, whether it was steel, aluminium ore. Every basic city had a decent manufacturing capacity, and the people, most importantly, mostly men who had high school educations and not college, were able to get really good, well-paying jobs that had the all-important health insurance. And so for those men who were kind of not very well educated, but would have been considered to be kind of working class, blue collar men, they were able to get a job for life that would provide for their families. They were able to buy houses and do all that stuff. Over the last 50 years, the Midwest and what is now the Rust Belt has been eviscerated by economic globalization. Now, I'm a fan of the free market. Don't get me wrong. But we cannot defend the free market without admitting that there are casualties to the free market. And there have been casualties. Those low-skilled, poorly educated workers in the West that were previously thriving in, and this is true of UK industrial towns as well, and they were thriving as a result of the fact that there was a lot of manufacturing going on in their country. they've all suffered as a result of globalization because their jobs were easily done elsewhere for cheaper. That's basically the bottom line. And in conjunction with that, we had in New York a mega boom in asset values as a result of round after round of quantitative easing, which is effectively printing money. So over the years, the Federal Reserve has been printing money. That money had to land somewhere, and it was landing in Wall Street. So as a result, Wall Street was getting richer while the heartland of the United States was getting poorer. And that is undeniable. So there have been winners and losers in globalization, and Ireland has definitely been a winner. Ireland has developed a manufacturing base and a tech base and a pharma base out of nothing. We had nothing, and now we have those bases. So we got those from somewhere. And what is being argued by those on the Trump side is you got those from us, okay? And we're not alone. There's those factories in China, the people in the Midwest of the United States, that you got them from us. The cars that are built in Korea and Japan that are now filling American roads, people will say, you got those from Detroit. So there's certainly, from the losers of globalization, there is a case to be made. And they are Trump heartland. That is what Trump is. Trump represents blue-collar, working-class guys who feel they've missed out, who feel America was great back then and America is not great now. And he has told people, if you just listen to him, he told people from day one what he was going to do. He was going to tariff. He was going to restore competitiveness and manufacturing to those Midwest states. And he's doing it. This is his plan. Now, there are ups and downs of the plan, okay? I've spoken a bit about it. I'll just let you come in on what you feel about that aspect, the historical aspect of what he's trying to do. And then if you want, I'll defend what he's doing today.
But, well, I think what you're saying is completely right. And I think it's literally the reason why he got elected. I mean, there's no other, reason why Trump got elected. And, like John's not here. He's definitely listening to the podcast, so he'll laugh when he said, I'm not rubbing his nose in it. But I knew Trump or felt reasonably confident that Trump was going to win. You did too. And the reason for that was literally based on trips that I'd made to the States, to places like Montana and other places. And then I can remember saying it to you at the time, really unusual people that I know in the States who I wouldn't have expected to have been voting for Donald Trump kind of started to openly talk on their Instagrams and stuff like that. Like I know of people, a few different states that wouldn't be traditionally Republican, and people that I definitely wouldn't have thought would have been voting for Donald Trump say it. And I said, oh, there's something going on. And what you're saying is that those people, that's the slogan, make America great again. In other words, it was before and could be again if you vote for me. That's the beauty of that slogan. It works because it's for the left behind guys, and the left behind guys are what elected Donald Trump.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I mean,
you want every single...
So, like, whether or not, and like you said, we can get to it in a second, but like whether or not Donald Trump is doing something that's good for Ireland or good for the global economy, there's a very strong case to be made that Donald Trump is doing what he told the people like that who voted for him that he would do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's not, surprising anybody who was listening to him. He's not doing anything he's not doing anything that he lied about. He told people exactly what he was going to do. The only problem is a lot of people didn't believe him, because a lot of people have been saying this for so long. Clinton said this, I'm going to fight you until the last dog barks. And, George W. Bush said this. They all promise those heartland American blue collar voters, they all promised them that they're going to make their lives better again. And none of them ever did, because they all sold out to that financialization that's happened as a result of Wall Street becoming richer. They all sold that because they were all getting funded by them, let's be honest. Trump didn't. Trump did not get funded by those guys. And so he didn't owe them anything. And even this week when he was being asked about the fact that that the Dow Jones was going down, he said, I don't really care. I don't really care about that. Like, that's not what matters to blue collar workers. What matters to blue collar workers is what's going to happen next. And what's going to happen next is, as a result of what I do, there's going to be literally a redistribution of wealth in the United States from Wall Street to Main Street. Main Street meaning those kind of those Midwest states. If you think about it, he won every single swing state. Every single swing state. He won the popular vote, but he also won every single swing state. The swing states for a reason. They bounced between the Republicans and the Democrats because there is this there is this kind of promise that is made to those people at every election cycle. The Democrats make it, then they break the promise. The Republicans make it, and they break the promise. And that's why those states swing back and forth. Trump made the same promise, but this time he's just following through on it.
And so to move to more domestic matters, you know, obviously we've seen this week, and we can get into it, but obviously we've seen, you know, a lot of skittishness, we'll say, from our government and from the chattering classes, we'll say, in Ireland about what this means for Ireland or whatever. And for the record, I think they're right to be concerned. And I would have always said, you know, Donald Trump is there for American voters first, and this is the consequence. Then Irish government have to be there for Irish voters first. Do you think that this should be a wake-up call for the Irish government in terms of how our economy is managed, or do you think we just hold on to the side of the boat and hope to hang on through the next 4 years?
Well, I mean, the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council has been trying to wake up the Irish government for about 10 years about the fact that they're overspending and the fact that they're relying on effectively windfall taxes in exactly the same way as the government pre-2008 did. They relied on property windfall taxes, stamp duty, those kind of things. We're now relying on corporation taxes that they admit themselves they cannot predict what they will be, where they're coming from, and even when they land, they can't work out where they came from. So we're relying on literally a credit card that's dropping in the letterbox, and we don't know who sent it. You know, this is a model that is destined to cause tears. Plus the overarching fact is, and this is the interesting thing, 3 multinationals, and you could nearly guess them, but 3 multinationals give us most of our corporation tax. 3. And so all it takes is 1 to go, never mind 2 or 3, and our corporation tax base collapses. On top of that, about 25% of our income tax is related directly or indirectly to workers in multinational corporations and the people who work around them. And so our income tax base will collapse if these guys are tempted back to the United States. So without the foreign direct investment sector, Ireland is basically Albania. You know, our domestic economy is, you know, very poor when it comes to generating wealth, very poor when it comes to generating taxes. So if you take that FDI component out of the Irish economy, we're basically Albania with rain, you know? And so we're absolutely right to be terrified about what's going to happen here. As I said previously, Ireland benefited from globalization. But if there's a retrenchment away from globalization now as a result of the Trump tariffs, Ireland will suffer, absolutely will suffer. And we've been warning, the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council have been warning the Irish government for literally 10 years. There was an over-reliance on FDI taxes, and we're spending way too much. So the guys are waking up, Mial and Simon are waking up a wee bit too late. How do you now generate the kind of indigenous businesses that could sustain us through that kind of storm? So I think they're all hoping that Trump is going to pull back, you know, completely. I mean, I know he's in a 90-day pause, but he's going to pull back on the idea of these tariffs completely. But I think there's eluded. I think, you know, he's definitely going to add a minimum 10% tariff, and he's going to then pick sectors that he wants to entice back. And the obvious sectors are tech and pharma. So I think Ireland are very vulnerable to a second round of this Trumponomics.
And so, in your mind, what could the Irish government even do? I mean, are we a train on a track that's heading for something that we can't really do anything about? Or is there things that could be done in the short term? I mean, you know, like let's be honest. I mean, John and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, or even maybe it was last week, about the 30% drop in Irish tourism, for starters. I mean, there's some problems there that are probably being masked by other things. What do you do in the next 90 days to try and lower the frankly, the impact on this potentially on the Irish economy?
Well, look, I mean, this is all about credits and debits. So the first thing you do is you've got to start getting control of your spending. Our spending is absolutely out of control. We have effectively doubled the budget lines on every single department in the last 10 years. Health has had over double the amount of money put into it from 10 years ago to now. Is it doubly good? Is our healthcare system doubly good compared to what it was in 2015? I don't think so. So, you know, we're blowing money in all directions. As you know, our NGO sector is an industry that has just been generated by this nefarious conduit from government to media to NGO, as the staff move around, as the faces move around, and the funding moves around. Billions and billions of euro going into this opaque industry. So our country is spending way too much, and we just haven't copped onto that yet. So the first thing we need to do is get control of our spending. Then the second line is our tax revenues. Our tax revenues are going to come from individuals, fair enough, but they also have to come from companies. They have to, because we rely so much on FDI. So we've got to keep our FDI in the country at all costs. And if that means that we have to start playing by the Trump rules and dropping out of agreements, for example, the 15% minimum tax rate, whatever it takes, we're in a survival mode now. We need to start looking at the possibility of breaking a few eggs if we're going to make an omelet here. The other thing is we need to obviously look at trying to build up our indigenous base and move our markets into Asia, and look east as opposed to constantly looking west. They're more medium-term goals. Now, we do have a bit of time. Let's be honest. Nobody in Intel or Facebook or whatever is going to make an instantaneous decision on the basis of what Trump says, because as we've just discovered, he can change his mind next week. Okay. Plus the fact he only has 3.5 years left. And that's the cold reality. That's the way they will look at it. They will think, well, we're not going to make a decision on sticking a factory in Idaho on the basis that Trump is the president when he could be gone in 3 years. And so at worst case scenario, they're making medium-term plans for the fact that at the next election, if Vance wins, then they know this policy is going to continue. If a Democrat wins, probably things will be reversed. Although I'm very interested to see that not one Democrat has come out and said that they would repeal his tariffs. Now, that's really interesting, because realistically, this is not right-wing economics. This is as far from free trade. This is far from Hayek and Mises and Friedman. This is as far as you can get from classical liberal or libertarian economics. This is old school, nationalistic, old left-wing economics. This is protecting unions. This is protectionism for its own sake. And so in a way, ironically, Trump is kind of engaged in old school left-wing economics, nationalistic left-wing, and people will go bananas to hear me say that. But it's true. This is not at all. This is why Musk is beginning to kind of pull back. Musk sent out a tweet this week, and the tweet was Friedman, Milton Friedman, a video of him explaining, my idol, explaining how a pencil gets made and the inputs that are required for the pencil from all over the world, from all different places. And the reason he posted that is because he's trying to say, look, I'm an international free trade guy, despite what Trump has been. So there are divisions there, but Trump is not engaged in any kind of right-wing economics. I've seen this on Twitter. Oh, this right-wing economics is going to collapse the world. This is not what we're talking about here. And what's your feeling on Trump in general? I mean, we've spoken about this many times, but do you think that he has a plan? Do you think he has a plan, or do you think he is just is he a reality star who just likes the limelight?
No, I mean, I think John's Trump derangement syndrome is just so bad that I kind of pull the other way, and that's the way the podcast works really well. I think time and time and time again, people have dismissed Trump as a fool, as not knowing what he's doing or whatever. And I think that at this point, I whether I think he's doing something that it will be a mistake long term or damage the global economy is one thing. But do I think that Trump understands and knows what he's doing? I do.
Yeah.
I just do. And I think that the people, it's really easy and, enjoyable for some people, like John included, to just dismiss everything Donald Trump does, and he's a tick and he's a moron and the big buffoon and he's this and he's that and whatever. But I just think how many months now into the second term and the election result that he got, and like I said, we thought he was going to get elected, but I certainly didn't call it that he was going to win the popular vote as well. You know what I mean? And at the time of the election, for example, they were doing rallies and stuff in New York. And do you remember we were talking about it before about like, why was he doing rallies in New York when he was never going to win New York? Because they had their eyes on the popular vote. They knew they were going to win, and they had their eyes.
Yeah.
They wanted the popular vote as well. Like, these are not stupid people. And dismissing everything they do.
Yeah.
Dismissing everything Donald Trump and the people around him will say, do, you know, as he's just this big orange buffoon. It's just, I think that people who think that way need to do some more thinking, quite frankly. And that doesn't mean that you have to agree with him or think that he's right and everything, or think that he's going to turn out to be correct. I'm not suggesting that everything he does is some secret plan and it's all going to become, you know, all will become clear in time. I don't know that. Nobody knows that. But I'm not convinced that Trump is this moron who doesn't know what he's doing either. And as I say all the time, I don't like it. I care about jobs in Kildare and Dublin and Kerry and whatever. I care about Ireland first. But I didn't vote for Donald Trump. American people did. People who were used to work in car factories, as you say, people in Midnight, Mississippi, people in Ohio, they voted for Donald Trump because they have their problems and they want him to fix their problems. There's no sense in us sitting around here screaming and roaring about what a gobshite he is when we have our own.
Yeah. I mean, the fact is that people look at the chaos, okay? And there's undoubted chaos because you don't know what 100%. Way he's going to go, and you don't know what he's going to do tomorrow and all that. But that is in itself a strategy. So this was first brought about by Nixon in the early 70s. He introduced this phrase, madman diplomacy. So madman diplomacy was effectively a strategy that he employed to scare China primarily, but also the Soviet Union and other adversaries into thinking that this guy was so crazy, that he was such a madman, he didn't quite know what he was going to do. And he could do anything. So he could potentially, you know, fire a nuclear weapon. He could potentially invade your country. He could invade another country. He could invade Cuba. He just didn't know what he was going to do because he's such a madman. And I really think that Trump is harnessing that. I think that Trump's natural instincts in business were always to go in way too big in the hope that he would get a deal that was lower. So he would go in and say, I want to, you know, buy all the buildings on this street and I'm going to kick you all out and we're going to buy your debt and and he would go in hyper aggressive so that people would do deals and he would get something off the plate. And I think he has brought that into politics, and he's also harnessing this madman diplomacy so that his adversaries, whether they're domestic or international, are left wondering what he's going to do next. And they can't predict. And because they can't predict, they can't react. And so I think that the Trump tariffs and then him pulling back and saying you've got 90 days to sort it out is kind of like him saying, look, these guys in the back room are telling me that I need to give you 90 days to do a deal. I don't think you're going to be able to do a deal. And I think I'm just going to hit you with 200% tariffs in 90 days. And so there's massive pressure then for Ireland. They sent Simon Harris over to save whiskey. You know, there's massive pressure for all these countries to call up somebody in the Trump administration and say, look, can I speak to the good cop? Because obviously Trump's the bad cop.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, sending Simon Harris over to save the day is, you know, it's.
Really,
the only analogy I can think of is if, you know, is if you and I are upstairs and we hear a burglar and we send our cat down the stairs to try and interfere, like to you know, stop the burglar from coming up the stairs and murdering us all.
Of late, you're speaking an awful lot about burglars breaking into the house. I've noticed that. You know, you had your speech at the Dublin Chamber, and you're also volunteering me as the guy that goes down the stairs with the pipe. You know, and now we're sending the cat. You know, you're inviting these burglars onto us. I think you're manifesting.
First of all, we don't have a cat. And second of all, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the point is, Simon Harris wouldn't be my top pick for our top big strong man sent out to sort things out, especially given his track record and his support of Kamala Harris and his name calling of Donald Trump. But sure, that's a whole other show. I think we'll move away from Donald Trump because I'm sure John is listening and is pulling his hair out and, you know, is eager to come back and argue with everything you just said there. But you did touch on something that I listed off earlier on and I want to talk about, because you, as a person with a medical background were particularly incensed by this story this week. It's not a new story. It's come out before about the operations, would it be scoliosis operations that are being done in the investigation that's going on. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so there was an internal review done in Temple Street as a result of 3 children having operations where unauthorized, kind of unlicensed, is probably the best way to put it, unlicensed springs were inserted into their backs to try to straighten their backs. And these springs have not been licensed for medical use. They were springs that were seen by the surgeon in Temple Street at a conference in the Netherlands, as I understand it. And he saw springs being used to great effect with the most severe cases that are otherwise almost untreatable. So we're not talking about mild scoliosis, we're not talking about every case. We're talking about the really hard luck cases, and the ones that have very few options. And so as a result, he brought them back. He spoke to another surgeon there. He allegedly spoke to one of the directors in Temple Street, who denies that the conversation happened, but both surgeons say it happened, and said, look, I want to try this. I want to see if I can help these children who are otherwise unhelpable. Like, otherwise we cannot help them. I want to see if I can help those children. So the operations were conducted, and there was immediately kind of a bit of a furore because they weren't licensed in Ireland to use these springs. It was not quite an experimental treatment, but it was certainly an unorthodox treatment. And as a result, an internal review was conducted, and this guy's been thrown under the bus. He's been completely thrown under the bus, and he's been made out to be some kind of cowboy and I saw David Cullinan, the Sinn Féin health spokesman, saying it's a disgrace and a travesty and all this kind of stuff. Well, I mean, I would say to him, like, if it was your child in pain, in roaring pain, with crippled over, bent over, and there was no other option, this guy was willing to try something and try to help your child, what would you do? I mean, all of the parents were told that these springs were being used. They were told it was an unorthodox treatment. I have a lot of sympathy for this guy. I think he was genuinely trying to do his absolute best with these kids. He wasn't in any way callous. He wasn't in any way flippant with their health. I think he is the guy. There's no one else in the room. There's literally no one behind him waiting to come in if he can't do the job. He's it. He's the guy. And so there's huge responsibility on him to try to help these children. And I think he was doing absolutely everything he could. But in the classic Irish way, we assume this guy has nefarious ambitions, and that he's just our motivations. And that he's, some kind of narcissistic guy who's just like, and you couldn't be further from the truth. From what I hear from friends of mine who are in medicine, I'm a dentist, but friends of mine who are in medicine, that, this guy is one of the salt of the earth guys. He's the guy you want in the room with your kid. And he's been completely, I think, steamrolled and thrown under a bus here, and it's shocking.
But is that not, I mean, my guess, and this is all, that a lot of that what you've just said there is news to me, but is this not all a kind of a classic thing, as you say, that we do, but we focus on one thing because it's a great yarn, you know what I mean? It's kind of Harold Shipman kind of stuff, like that there was this
exactly.
Was this ghoul in there, and he was like, taking bits of, I don't know, like roller skates and putting them into kids, like some kind of weird science experiment, whatever. And that's like a great yarn. And then the media run it, and everybody gets all outraged or whatever. But like at the same time, you'd really have to wonder, it's like that expression, hard cases make bad laws. Like, is this not, and when everybody focuses on the guy and the situation and that narrative, nobody focuses on the absolutely horrendous system that would have caused a surgeon at his level to be so desperate and so unsupportive, to have gone to probably a conference, and you said the Netherlands, seen something that might work. We've spoken, John and I, me in particular, have spoken before on this podcast a lot about children awaiting scoliosis operations in Ireland and Now, I don't know, we don't know the details of those specific cases, but where's the conversation in the media about what drove this circumstances to exist at all? How desperate, we can assume you're, as you said, you're a dentist, lots of your friends are, like, people who go into those kind of vocations go in because they have, for the most part, a desire to help people. That is a very specialized area of medicine, I would understand, a very difficult area of medicine, very heartbreaking, I'm sure. Big stakes, big wins, big highs, big lows, we'll say. And here we have this person who, like we can imagine, based on what you're saying, is so desperate to help people that are completely abandoned, we know, by the system, completely ignored, utterly left behind for years and years and years. You say some of them were unfixable. Some of them started out fixable and they waited so long that they became unfixable because of the system. And it suits the government of the day to talk, to allow this narrative to continue, as opposed to saying, what is the system that created these circumstances? Where did this desperation come from? Because I guarantee you that there's no surgeon in, parts, let's say New York, private medicine in New York, who's doing those kind of surgeries, who would ever risk their career, their livelihood, their, being struck off potentially by doing this kind of nonsense, unless they were in a war-torn zone and had no other choice. It reminds me of people like hacking someone's leg off in the middle of a war without any anesthetic because they've got no other choice. And we in Ireland have a surgeon who specializes in spinal surgery, like using experimental things because he's so desperate.
Yeah, but I mean,
and nobody talks about that.
But we are in a war-torn situation when it comes to scoliosis treatment in Ireland. Simon Harris, if you remember, when he was Minister for Health, was going to fix the scoliosis waiting lists. Then he was going to fix them when he was Taoiseach. Now he's back being Taoiseach. He's extremely quiet at the moment about this scoliosis issue, as is Micheál, because they both know, as you said, they are responsible for the situation that surgeon found himself in, that those children have found themselves in. They are responsible for not fixing this problem. You have spoken on the podcast before about whatever it takes. If it takes getting retired surgeons from the UK who have done this operation 5,000 times and they're retired, and you bring them over and you bend the rules and you get them licensed to practice in Ireland to do goddamn scoliosis operations, do it. If it takes taking out the Hermitage kind of as a scoliosis center and just making the Hermitage do scoliosis operations with private surgeons flown in from Timbuktu to fix the problem, you fix the problem. The problem can be fixed. The issue is they don't fix it because it's too tricky to fix. It's awkward to fix. There's probably rules they have to bend, or they don't want to bend the rules. And meanwhile, they're off gallivanting trying to save the whiskey industry from Trump's tariffs. So this guy is left on the front line, this surgeon is left on the front line to try and fix the mess that he's been handed by our government. And he's fine. He's sailing close to the wind here. Okay, grand. But he's genuinely doing it with a good heart. He's doing it with the best intentions to these children who otherwise are left bent over and in pain in cots in Temple Street with nobody else to help them. And so I really think this guy, people need to just reflect. I've seen an awful lot of really nasty stuff, kind of written about him online. And people need to reflect on, try to put yourself in his shoes for a minute and imagine he has the best intentions, not the worst.
Well, look, we'll see. I mean, I think, like you were talking earlier on about, we do have a new Minister for Health, Jennifer O'Carroll McNeil, and I think she has been quite quiet since she's become Minister for Health. We haven't heard much about, the Children's Hospital thus far, and we haven't heard much from her on this. That's not me saying that she's not doing anything. I'm just saying, it remains to be seen. But I think that the plan of the government is to allow this guy to be thrown under the bus and avoid at all costs conversations that might make people start to question why, how, when, and what part we as a society played in allowing this situation to arise. But we're not really good at those kind of hard conversations. So
no.
I don't.
Thinking about Jennifer O'Carroll McNeil, I think that I'm hoping that she's actually quite clever, because having been close to a couple of ministers for health and during my own political days, Mary Harney when I was in the PDs and then James Riley when I was in Fine Gael, they both went in with grand ideas, big plans, and lots of noise. And as a result, they gained an awful lot of enemies, both in the Department of Health, who had officials in there directly briefing against them to the media. And also, they made enemies in the hospital systems. And as a result of making all this noise, it shortened their career in health, and it also minimized what they could do. It held them back. So I wonder if she has gained a bit of wisdom from that. I hope she has. And instead, she's kind of, walking quietly and carrying a big stick. And she's doing things slowly, and she's doing things behind the scenes and changing things as they need to be changed. I'd love to think that. Okay, I'm an eternal optimist.
Oh, but, you all romantic, you Keith.
But
dream
Jennifer,
on. Yeah.
So Jennifer, if you're watching this, and I know a lot of you ministers do. If you're watching this, I'm rooting for you. Okay.
That's nice, Keith. That's really nice. I'm rooting for a new children's hospital to be completed before our youngest child turns 18. Small wins.
Yeah.
She turned 3 last week, so you've got the 15 years to get it over the line, guys. That's my dream.
Well,
Speaking of dreams,
you're the eternal optimist as well. Then.
Speaking of dreams, you want to move to Hungary. Do you want to explain why?
Now, Sarah, we have 3 beautiful children. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we have 3 beautiful children, 8, 6, and 3, and I think we could share a little bit of information with your viewers that there was a negotiation about number 3. There was a debate. I was happy with 2. I would have sat with 2. Sarah wanted to go for 4, ladies and gentlemen. So the compromise was 3. Okay. And so we have a beautiful daughter now, and I don't regret a thing. And if she's ever listening to this in the future, I always wanted you. But I am willing to have a 4th child, Sarah. Live here now, I'm telling you and your viewers, I think we should have a 4th child, but only if we can move to Hungary. I don't know if you're aware, but Prime Minister Orban over there has decided that he's going to incentivize it in quite a big way. So if you have 1 child in Hungary now, you will get a 25% discount off all your income tax forever. This is now the mothers, okay? If you have 2, you get a 50% discount off your future income tax. If you have 3, it's 75%. And if you have 4 children, you'll never pay income tax again. And I think that's worth one more round, one more go round. What do you reckon, Sarah?
It's easy for you to say, Keith. You don't have to do anything.
I beg your pardon.
I think I'd be happy enough. with the 75%, to be honest.
Yeah,
but no, it's an interesting thing, because what it also does is it's utterly useless unless you go back to work. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't mean anything. So if you listeners to the podcast, although I stayed at home for 8 years, and we would have talked in the past about on the podcast, and then you and I privately about there is a population issue. People are having less and less children. When we look at all of our friends, they fall into two categories. Usually it's 2 kids, a lot less people like ourselves that have 3, and then occasionally you might have a friend who has 4, but like that'd be in the very much rare. 3 is kind of the top end of it, and a lot of more people than ever have no children or whatever. And so there is issues with boring stuff, but it's really a serious problem, like pensions being paid in future, etc., etc., etc. And when I stayed at home, and we would have talked about it a lot at the time, like there really is, everything is against you in your quest to have more children. I mean, if, all jokes aside, we both, you come from 3, I come from 3. 3 was always a kind of a number we had in mind. And but if it was easier to have children in Ireland, we might have had 4, because, but when you have 4 children, you're talking about a different car. You're talking about, I mean, the childcare bills are eye-watering. There is everything is just stacked against you. I don't mind saying, like we were just today sorting out something. The kids are getting their Easter holidays tomorrow. School is closing at 10 past or 11:50 because the kids are going home. The school was closed on Monday just gone because there was a maths training day. They're all for 2 weeks on Friday. There was a half day last Wednesday, wasn't it? Where they were finishing early. Like, it's never ending. And if 2 parents are working, it's just stacked against you all the time. And it's very expensive to feed kids and clothe kids and all the other stuff that goes with it.
Well, that's the other thing
to finish, I think that when you implement policies like that, like this sounds really, really, really radical, and it's amazing, and it would suit us down to the ground or whatever. But the truth is that but you have to policies, as John will always say, like policies change culture. And if you want there to be more children, you have to create policies that make it easier to have more children, because that will change the culture. And the culture has become to and through for a lot of people. And I think that policies that will encourage people and make it easier for people to have children should be welcomed. Absolutely. Now, I'm not moving to Hungary, but I still think it's a good idea. And I think that because only the people who go back to work can avail of it, it's probably not that expensive.
But also, you touched on it there, like the so-called demographic deficit that's happening across the Western Europe in particular, where people are having fewer and fewer children. The reason they're having fewer and fewer children is because, as you say, governments in general are not supporting people who live there to have children. And it is the reason that the EU give for having mass migration. It is the reason is we're not producing enough children. Therefore, the pyramid scheme that is our welfare system requires more people to come in at the bottom to make sure that there are pensions for people later on. And so therefore we need to bring people in from other countries. And this is why we need to do this. Okay. Now that presupposes that the people you're bringing in from other countries are going to be net contributors. They're going to be workers who pay taxes. And at the moment, we have an enormous amount of people who are not. They are not satisfying that criteria. And so the whole ambition of mass migration when it comes to the EU is to correct this thing where people are not having enough children, instead of looking at, as Orban is suggesting, and as you just suggested, maybe incentivize your own people to have more children. Wouldn't that be a far more sensible thing to do? Because you then know that those people are ingrained in the culture. You then know that those people can seamlessly move through all of the systems without requiring extra resources like translators and all the rest of it. But I think what's more important is to understand that fundamentally this is a policy problem, and it can be corrected with a policy remedy. And Ireland has for a long time now been anti-family. It has been anti-family, and so governments, in my entire lifetime, I think probably since the 80s, have been anti-family and all about getting mothers and fathers out to work. And that's all great. If mothers and fathers both want to work, that's great. But if one of them, mostly mothers, let's be honest, but if one of them decides, actually, I don't want to work and I'd rather stay at home and I'd rather make that my life's passion, I'd rather make that my life, that option is just not available. It's just not available.
Yeah. But this is it. If you want to have children, then this is the thing. Like, some people don't want to have children, and that's fine. But the thing is that for the people who do want to have children, and I've said this before, you'll recall me going away with a group of girlfriends when I was pregnant with our second child. And I went away on a weekend, and there were girlfriends that I went to college with and did like a master's with. And so they'd all be kind of like, working. And I was going on this night away with the girls, and I was a little bit like kind of anxious about what their reaction would be when I told them that I wasn't going to work anymore indefinitely. And I remember coming home and saying to you that one of them was like, oh, the dream. Like, if I didn't have a mortgage, like, I would love to be able to do that. Like, good for you. You'll be able to go back to work when you're 40 and you'll have a 25-year career. But like, do that now. And if I could, I would. And a lot, not all, some of my friends don't want any kids and have no kids and are really happy. But a lot of my friends who have had 2 kids would have liked to have had 3 or 4, but don't, for purely economic reasons, for reasons like that. When we were growing up, families lived closer together. You had parents around, you had aunties, you had uncles. As people have spread out, that doesn't exist anymore. So everything is money. Every event, everything, every baby, every childcare, that's all money. And they're, cutting their cloth to their measure, or whatever the expression is, and having 2 children because that's what they can afford, and that's that to keep their lifestyle, or to keep whatever. And without policies, that culture is that are pro-family, that culture is embedding in, like, even simple things like being able to transfer tax credits between married couples, when one is working, like there's so many things that could have been done to incentivize. And because of that, we have a culture where people have just stopped having as many children, and they started having children when they're much older. there's issues that go with that as well in terms of fertility and stuff like that, because women have been told, forget everything else, the career is the most important thing. And again, I'm a very career driven person myself, so I'm not saying it's not, but your ability to work is much, 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 much longer in terms of years than your ability to have children. And I just don't think that's communicated effectively to girls at all.
Yeah, I mean this whole false promise of you can freeze your eggs and come back to this when you're older. I mean this is a fantasy. I mean people who go through IVF, and I've people very close to me who have gone through. You soon learn this is not a magic bullet. I mean this is just
No.
helping you with some percentage chance of it working, but
Yeah.
it's not a definite by any stretch of the imagination. And the older you are, the less likely it is. And so people are being fed a line. You could just work away, folks, just work away. And let's face it, it falls to women because women have a biological clock that perhaps men don't. And so it falls to women to kind of start maybe standing up for their rights if they want to have that choice. I mean, we're also talking about pro-choice, How about the choice of women who want to stay at home, look after their children, raise their children for a number of years, and either return to the workforce or maybe not. Maybe just stay as full-time moms. There's no shame in that. I mean, my mother was a full-time mom. She was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. So, you help your children, and isn't that a wonderful thing to be able to say at the end of your days,
Yeah.
So there's no right and wrong here. For some people, yes, you want to go back to work as fast as you can. Great. Okay. That's your choice. But for the people who go on to do that, they don't have that choice. Our policy just doesn't allow it.
Yeah, and I don't see any sign anytime soon because the as you touched on earlier on, the power of the NGOs and the Women's Council about their agenda and the way they see their worldview on what's progressive and what helps women and whatever is just so skewed and so off the wall that they haven't even copped on to some of this stuff yet. And it's the culture has changed so much and will continue to change, I think, in the wrong direction. Now, obviously, if countries like Hungary start to implement policies like this, it might become part of the discussion here. But I still think a lot of the time people are just afraid to even have it in case somebody starts crying because, hurty words or something.
Like the NGOs and the media are controlling this narrative at the moment. And radical feminism is basically controlling this viewpoint that, a woman who is a mother and that's all she is, in some way, the epitome of the oppression of the patriarchy. Like, get over it, girls. I mean, this is, the National Women's Council needs to be abandoned. I mean, they don't represent women at all. And so this notion that gets fed into politics and the media through the NGOs that, there's only one way, and that's to, emulate men and at the same time hate men, but emulate them. Just total confusion and abandon the role of what it is to be a woman because, let's face it, a man can be a woman now next week. So, this anti-woman, anti-family viewpoint, it permeates all aspects of our NGO, media, and political culture at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think we'll move on from that, but we'll leave it. We'll leave a marker in it. We're not moving to Hungary, but we're definitely in favour of some of their policies for now. How about that?
And we're sticking with 3 children.
Absolutely. You heard it here first at last. So I suppose we're coming to the end, but you're a libertarian and you've been on the podcast before. So now you're, after shouting at the podcast at me and John and just, not having your time to shine, do you want to give the listeners a little brief on where we stand in Ireland in terms of your top topics: sex work, drug legalisation, and you mentioned Enoch Burke. I don't know what your angle is there, but go for your life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was interested to hear yourself and John discussing sex work last week. You were talking about the prospect as a result of a review that sex work could be legalized, and you were both aghast, like two 1950s people looking over a fence. It was very, very depressing to listen to. I always look at these things from whether it's drug legalization or sex work legalization. I always look at it from here and now versus tomorrow and there. Like, so here and now we have situation. And there are good things and bad things about every situation, but there are undeniably bad things as a result of sex work being criminalized. Okay, women are pushed into the shadows, and their rights, by the way, to bodily autonomy, my body, my choice, is completely ignored by the left-wing NGOs who oppose sex work legalization. But their rights to decide what happens to them, whether they have sex with somebody for money or they don't have sex with somebody for money, that's entirely up to them. What happens in their bedroom is their business.
Yeah, but like, but.
No. Before you do that, I'm going to preempt something. The people who oppose this always say, but what about the women who are coerced and the people who've been trafficked here and all this kind of stuff? Trafficking is illegal. Trafficking should stay illegal. Coercion is illegal. It's called rape. That stays illegal. We're not talking about that. And we shouldn't allow people to, I'm certainly not going to allow people to muddy the waters and cloud things and make things appear that that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a classic Irish woman who's not been trafficked here, who's having sex, getting paid for it, and wants to do that rather than wants to do something else to feed her children. I don't think the state should be getting involved in what goes on in her bedroom. And so that's what I'm talking about. Now, you can start talking about hardcore cases like they did with the abortion referendum, but that is not what I'm talking about.
Not the same thing.
Go.
You're taking large brush strokes with the word choice. Like, I mean, you know, I honestly, so people who have come new to the podcast in the last while, just by way of background, Keith is a libertarian, so he thinks that, like, you know, you should be able to do whatever you want and the state shouldn't intervene within reason as long as you don't do any harm to anybody else. Would that be a good enough kind of,
that's it.
Short summary, whatever?
You're free to swing your fist until you hit somebody else's nose. Yeah.
And as is the source of most good marriages, we have been arguing about this for 11 years and I haven't changed your mind and you haven't changed mine. I think you take deep, long brush strokes with the word choice. I don't think most women choose to be prostitutes. I think you've spent too much time watching Pretty Woman and you have a completely ridiculous, absurd, romantic idea of what prostitution probably really is. And I think that you're the here and now and the tomorrow, whatever, and you don't think about, but that's somebody's daughter. You know, like like it's all very well to say, oh, you know, the state shouldn't intervene or whatever. State shouldn't intervene in what's going on in people's bedrooms, but the state should intervene in things that are denigrating to society.
No, but it's only denigrating to your mores, and what you're trying to do is force your mores onto other people. And when you say choice, okay, so do you think some man, you know, chooses to go down a manhole and clean the sewers for us? No, I mean, he does it because he has to do it. I'm not suggesting for one moment that a woman wakes up one morning and says, do you know what? I don't want to be a consultant in Ernst & Young anymore. I want to be a sex worker. That's not what I'm talking about. There are limited options in that situation. I freely admit that. But there are men and women doing jobs they don't want to do at the moment. There are men and women doing lots of jobs they don't want to do at the moment, that they find, you know, unappealing, that they find repulsive, that they don't like to do, but they do to put bread on the table. And so, you know, in a way, these middle class notions that people have, where they look at other people and try to put their choices onto them, I think that's unfair.
I think you're comparing apples and cartwheels, like, you know, going down the sewer and you don't want to do it, and something that is, I mean, what you're contributing to, and this is like John and I have talked before about Lily Phillips and things like that, is that this attitude contributes to a thing that you reduce people having sexual intercourse between two consenting adults. And we would use the term consent lightly because your poverty might, you know, I would question your consent if it's to feed your children. But anyway, into this, but it's not the same thing, Keith. Like, allowing your body to prostituting your body for sex with a stranger is not the same thing as, I really don't like my job at Centra making chicken fillet rolls. Like, come on. You're comparing apples and cartwheels, as they say. And you're simply wrong. And listen, this is my podcast, right? So I'm going to wrap up that part of the car. So you're just going to be wrong.
You're getting a window into the marriage that we have, you know? We will discuss where we're going on holidays. We will discuss what we might do on Saturday. We will discuss all these things, but at the end, it's Sarah makes the decisions.
strong women, you know, what can I say? Go on. So just finish your you know, your train of stuff. You need to give the people who listen a reason to want John to come back. And that's what John wants to. So talk a little bit about how you want to legalize drugs as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's face it. Again, we're talking about today, right? Today, you can get any drug you want if you want to get it. And the notion that you can't get a drug because it's illegal is obviously fantasy, okay? So we're in a situation where drugs are illegal, okay? And therefore, some people will say, oh, this is great that they're illegal. Well, what difference does it make? I mean, speeding is illegal, okay? People still speed. So we're starting in a position where you can get any drug you want, okay? But there are downsides to criminalizing people who take drugs. And in particular, people who are addicted to drugs, heroin being the classic example, cocaine, crack, whatever. So these drugs, if you make them illegal, all you do is make those people go to criminals to buy those drugs. Those criminals provide the drugs that, who knows what the quality of the drugs are, it increases their chances of dying. But secondly, we're now funding a black market. We're funding an organized crime sector, a whole business sector that our laws have created. The black market has created these laws. So we've got these Al Capones that are living in all parts of Ireland at the moment, all enriched by the notion that we've criminalized something that people are going to do anyway. So then there's other people saying, well, what would you legalize heroin? You know, we have legalized methadone. Okay. Methadone is an opiate. So what's the difference? If somebody turns up at a clinic and says, I don't want methadone, I want heroin, but it means I'm not going to burgle 12 houses today, and I'm not going to have a needle stick kind of mugging somebody on Talbot Street tomorrow afternoon because you're giving it to me for free. That's a win as far as I'm concerned. They're getting methadone anyway. And the only reason we legalize methadone and not heroin, and this is such a moralizing thing for the Irish state to do, it's fantastic. Methadone doesn't give you the kick that heroin does. It takes away the craving, but it doesn't give you the kick. So you can't get the pleasure from it in the same way as you can with heroin. And so we've legalized one opiate, but only because morally we feel good about the fact that they're not getting a kick out of it. Instead of legalizing and licensing and through a doctor, giving them heroin, and then they're not going to cause the mayhem in society that they're causing. To me, that's a way, way better solution. And also, in general, if you legalize drugs, think of the savings in time. Now, you probably don't like this as a criminal attorney, but think about the savings in time and money in courts, police, prisons. You know, it's an enormous benefit to society.
But I think that you're only focusing on, I think that somebody, let's say somebody who is a serious heroin addict, and you could say, okay, the far-reaching implications will take just one person, we'll call him John. John is a heroin addict. John has 3 children, whatever. You're only focusing on the criminal consequence of his heroin addiction. But in actual fact, an addict has ripple effect through society. So there's matters of child neglect. There's all kinds of things that arise from these things that aren't just, oh, well, everybody pack up their stuff. There's no more criminality because the drugs legal. Children will still be neglected. Like all kinds of horrible stuff happens because of drugs, Keith, that you know, legalizing drugs wouldn't do anything about. It's not just the criminal.
But they're illegal now, and those things happen. So what's the point in keeping it illegal? Those things happen.
Because you have absolutely no evidence other than your own expectations that legalizing heroin wouldn't increase the amount of people who are on heroin. You just don't know.
You genuinely believe. I mean, if you're somebody who takes heroin, and I've known a lot of people over the years, if you're somebody who takes heroin, you're not somebody who's taking heroin because, you know, on a Saturday you just feel like a kick. Okay. If you're somebody who's ended up taking heroin, you're somebody who's carrying a lot of emotional or psychological pain, and you've ended up in a situation probably from familial kind of being handed down, family member to family member, certainly friend group to friend group, this solution to your emotional and psychological pain. And it's a very small percentage of the population who are ever heroin addicts, and they will always be with us. They've been with us since the opiate dens in London in the 17 and 1800s. A small percentage of people will always be attracted to opiates because it eases the psychological and emotional pain that will always be there. It's part of the human condition. There is no way at all that Sarah Ryan is going to go out on a Saturday night, have 3 glasses of champagne, not Prosecco, folks, only champagne, 3 glasses of champagne, and then decide I'm going to get myself some heroin in the local shop. That's just not going to happen. And I'm not suggesting it should be sold in the local
don't be
shop.
silly.
I'm saying
Like,
it should be
that's
sold.
not-
It should be available through doctors in the way methadone is. That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay. Well, we're focusing on heroin. There's other drugs as well. I have been with you for 11 years. You haven't convinced me yet. People in the comments can give their 2 cents on what they think, but you've convinced me on a number of things over the years, as I have you, but you haven't convinced me on this yet, I'm afraid. So we'll have to close it there. Did you have something, your 2 cents you wanted to give on Enoch Burke? Is there something you wanted to say about
not
Enoch?
really. I mean, I've huge sympathy for Enoch Burke because I really feel he's kind of stuck in an ideological kind of whirlpool. The guy can't get out because, unfortunately, his ideology is such, whether it's religious or whether it's familial, his ideology is such that he can't be seen to give up now. And the state, is in some kind of battle of wills, and he's been stuck in this culture war with the state, and the state is unwilling to give him an off-ramp because the state needs to make him a sacrificial lamb to show other people that they have to toe the line. People will say he's not in prison because of a refusal to use transgender pronouns. He's in prison because he's breaking a court order. But the court order is there because he refused to use transgender pronouns. So, like, the whole point of this is, like, people
the root of it is the issue. Yeah.
Like, he wasn't going to just turn up one Tuesday and fall foul of the court system because he doesn't like lemonade. There's a reason that he is in front of the courts. There's a reason he feels he can't obey the court ruling. And the reason it all comes back to the notion of these transgender pronouns. To me, I think a brave politician needs to step forward and say, look, we need to give freedom of conscience to teachers, to healthcare workers, whatever it is, in the same way as we did make carve-outs in the abortion legislation. We have to give freedom of conscience to people, especially those who are so fervently religious like he is, that will give them an off-ramp and a way out and a compromise. And at the moment, he's just being, put in the public stocks, and we're all being told to fire rotten vegetables at him. And I've kind of sympathy for the guy because I think that he's probably like a way out if you could find some way of saving face. And who wants to spend their whole life in prison? But it looks bad for Ireland too. It does, no matter what anybody says. You can try to explain the complicated, fact that he's disobeying a court order and it's nothing about transit. Look, it looks bad for us, folks. I mean, we've been abroad. We were in the States recently. We've been speaking to people in the UK. The word's getting out, and it looks bad for us. It's not a good look. And I think that we need somebody, a brave politician, not sure who the heck that's going to be, but somebody needs to come forward and just find a way out.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll leave it there. John will be back next week. So thank you very much for joining me from another room in our house.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Hopefully everybody goes easy on you in the comments this week. John's gotten a hard time. I think I've been pretty fair to you because everybody was anticipating that I was going to, be harsh or something. I don't know. But
I've given them a lot of food, a lot of fuel there. So, if you can't be harsh on me, you're never going to be.
Okay. He has been Keith Redmond. I've been Sarah Ryan, and this has been The Week That Really Was. And we'll see you all back here next week. Bye.